Now, Donald Trump pleaded not guilty at his arraignment in Miami federal courthouse yesterday on 37 charges over his handling of classified national security documents when he had left the White House. He's now the first current or former US president ever to face federal criminal charges. After the hearing, Mr. Trump stopped off at a famous family-owned Cuban restaurant where supporters sang happy birthday to him because he turns 77 today. Then the former president returned to Bedminster in New Jersey, where he made his first public remarks after court. Have a listen.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great honor to have you here. And today we witness the most evil and heinous abuse of power in the history of our country. Very sad thing to watch. A corrupt sitting president had his top political opponent arrested on fake and fabricated charges of which he and numerous other presidents would be guilty. Right in the middle of a presidential election in which he is losing very badly. This is called election interference and yet another attempt to rig and steal a presidential election. More importantly, it's a political persecution like something straight out of a fascist or a communist nation. This day will go down in infamy, and Joe Biden will forever be remembered as not only the most corrupt president in the history of our country, but perhaps even more importantly, the president who, together with a band of his closest thugs, misfits, and Marxists, tried to destroy American democracy. But they will fail and we will win bigger and better than ever before.
So the initial reaction of Donald Trump to his arraignment and his plea of not guilty. Republican Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, had this reaction to the indictment.
Because now all of our institutions are being undermined. Now the whole country, we're watching this spectacle play out on television, and it will for the next year and a half. Not to mention, there's real questions about whether the president can get a fair shake here. I mean, what lawyer licensed to practice in the Southern District of Florida, works at a firm whose clients aren't going to complain if he signs up the president, can get the clearance to do a national security, and is actually a good lawyer? How hard is that going to be to find?
And South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham said this.
Most politicians get in trouble by self-inflicted wounds. He believes he had the right to possess these under the Presidential Records Act. I don't know whether that's accurate or not.
Well, that's somewhat equivocal from Lindsey Graham. Meanwhile, the political network financed largely by a billionaire called Charles Koch is launching a wave of digital ads targeting former President Donald Trump. And the ads are arguing, to his fans, I suppose, that if Trump becomes the Republican nominee next year, it will lead to President Joe Biden winning re-election.
Trump says this time he'll beat Biden. But 60% of voters don't want Trump to be president. The only way Biden wins is if we nominate Trump again. The American people are ready to move on.
Well, we're joined once again by Terry Sheridan, managing editor of WSHU Public Radio. Terry, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Pat.
Now, there were no riots, no insurrection. It went pretty much as the authorities had planned it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were small groups of Donald Trump supporters outside the courthouse. There were small groups of counter-protesters. But to be honest, there were more police and there were more reporters and media than there were protesters inside the courtroom. Yes, as you said, it went pretty well along the lines as was scheduled. It was a very perfunctory experience.
Now, the reaction from his own supporters and his own media support has been fairly predictable. I mean, Fox News calling Joe Biden a wannabe dictator who attempted to have his political rival arrested.
That was probably one of the biggest takeaways last night. The exact chyron, or the slug in the lower third of the TV screen, was wannabe dictator speaks at White House after having his political rival arrested. And there was a split screen of President Biden speaking at the White House and Trump speaking at his Bedminster golf course. And what we just heard from the clips that you played, yes, it was pretty much predictable. Trump and his supporters are saying this is the worst thing to ever happen in the country. Some Republicans are saying, hey, we have to move on, Chris Christie being one of them, and others saying, well, this kind of could be political, but, these are serious charges. Let's have them play out.
Now, there was some discussion last evening on CNN about the kind of jury that might be impaneled. And one Republican strategist said, look, this guy's going to be acquitted. How will you find a jury of Floridians who will convict him? And it was pointed out, well, the grand jury of Floridians decided to indict him.
That's absolutely right. Now, again, and this is the chess game that you or I are not fully aware of. When prosecutor Jack Smith decided to bring these charges in Florida, in southern Florida, he knew that he had to face possibly Judge Eileen, face the same judge that he faced earlier. And he also knew that, yes, the jury pool could be a little bit leaning towards Trump. So you wonder what the calculation was to bring the case in Florida as opposed to Washington, D.C.
And we don't know what that calculation is because Judge Eileen Cannon, she did rule in his favour earlier on, but then she was criticised herself, and a lot of judges don't like to be rebuked.
That's true. Now, Cannon, the interesting thing here is that Cannon is fully in charge of the process now. She can only her can remove herself from the case. That can't happen by the judge, other judges on the panel. But yes, she was severely criticized for some of her rulings by fellow judges who overturned it. I mean, the term being used is rebuked because they were just so favorable to Donald Trump against established precedent.
Now, if she rules in a way that seems to be over-friendly towards Trump's interests, can they appeal, the prosecutors, to a higher court? For example, if she grants them an adjournment until after the presidential election saga has elapsed, I mean, could they say, hang on a second?
Her rulings pre-trial can be appealed or questioned. Once the trial starts, no. And again, as I said yesterday, if Donald Trump is acquitted, if he is found not guilty, the prosecution cannot appeal that verdict. The defense can, because of a judge's ruling, the prosecution cannot. But everyone is expecting that this will last either deep into the presidential election or even beyond the presidential election. So some are saying that Donald Trump's strategy here would be to actually win the election, dismiss the case, or if he's convicted, pardon himself.
Now, the question of whether there is any possibility that he could win the case, or win the election, rather. He might win the case. Won't win the election, though, according to the numbers. And those ads which were made by this guy, Charles Koch, and his Republican outfit are aimed at Republicans, not at the general voters.
Right. Now, he has been, Charles Koch, he has been a major Republican donor for the past 40 years, and he is a very influential figure in steering the Republican Party away from being a conservative party into a deep conservative, into almost the MAGA territory. So this is a lot of money that's being thrown about. Now, again, the political calculation regarding Donald Trump is, yes, his supporters are fired up, but his supporters, while they may be a majority of the Republican Party, do not reflect a majority of the country. Obviously, Democrats and independents are not fully on board with the Donald Trump train.
Now, there's another interesting comparison, I suppose, that was made last night in some of the news coverage, and that is harking back to that guy who was a member of the Massachusetts Air National Guard who's arrested by the FBI in connection with the leaking of classified documents. His name was Jack Teixeira, I think, 21-year-old, and they pointed out he's behind bars.
He's behind bars. Now, one of the things, and again, this is just this is my opinion, but it was that they did not want to, the prosecution nor the courts wanted to embarrass Donald Trump yesterday. They wanted to give him every opportunity to appear that they were being fair and even-handed. For instance, there was no mugshot, there was no bond. The conditions of his release are fairly generous, and they even changed it in the court. First, it was like you're to have no contact with Walt Mauda, the co-defendant, or anybody who's going to be a witness. Trump's lawyer said, well, that's impossible. Most of them work for him. All right, you can have contact, but you can't discuss the case with them. So they were very lenient yesterday in granting him his bond conditions.
Yeah. And his co-defendant is having his legal fees paid by one of the outfits raising funds. So it's interesting, if the prosecution are trying to turn him, they turn him, he loses his legal representation.
He loses his legal representation, but that has been something that's been done successfully in New York in several of the civil cases against Donald Trump, and in one of the criminal cases involving the Trump Organization, in which Trump was paying the legal fees, or the Trump Organization were paying legal fees. State prosecutors managed to flip the witnesses.
Terry, on that note, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again and again. But Terry Sheridan, thank you very much for joining us on the programme.